Hello, where better to film my winter whisky collection for 2017 than in front of our fire? Now, we currently live in a wayside cottage, which means that this old part of the house is quite close to the road. So if you hear cars going by, I'm really sorry. But also if I dissolve in a pool of warmth from the whisky and the fire, it is all for you that I'm doing this. So I've got my basket of whiskies, and I'm going to start off with a whisky that I've shown you before. This is the Isle of Skye 8-year-old whisky from Ian MacLeod. Now, I put a lot of thought into my whisky collections, and it's one thing actually choosing the whiskies, it's quite another thing to actually get them in the right order. Now, I know a lot of you say, oh dear, you haven't got much whisky in the bottles when you talk to us. Well, all these whiskies have been tasted already by my Chichester whisky women, so I'm going to be able to report back to you about what they thought. So I'm starting off with this. Look, it's a blended whisky. Isle of Skye, obviously there's only one distillery at the moment on Skye, and that's Talisker. Well, this isn't being sold as Talisker, and indeed all those lovely seaweedy maritime type aromas that I'm getting from the glass, yes, they come from the Skye whisky, but it's been blended with Speyside whiskies and indeed some grain. So the nose is actually really soft, really inviting, but it's got more character to it than the standard average blended whisky that you would get in any shop. So it is really interesting. Now, I said about getting the order right because this whisky is one that has been raved about by Jim Murray, and who am I and who are you to go against what he says? But actually, when I tasted this with whisky women, excuse me, it kind of lost out to some of the other whiskies. But overall, everybody says what a fantastic everyday, let's have a whiskey and water type whisky this is. I don't think that does it justice. And if you have a chance to try it, just on the nose, you'll know immediately what I mean. So, the first sip, yes, the seaweed is there, and that is kind of what's dominant, but there is this beautiful sweetness with it as well, and the softness that perhaps comes and that we associate more with Speyside. So that very small first sip, 40% proof, so it's up to you if you put water with it or not. Now for me, on the second sip, the smoke is much more prevalent, and I've got so little in here, I'm just going to really have to put the most minuscule drop of water in there. Opens up the nose completely, and it makes it a really delicious, characterful blended whisky. And it is fantastic. And what I really like about this is that lots of people go to Skye for mountaineering. And from every bottle of this that is sold, a donation is given to the Mountain Rescue Charity. But look guys, start of the year, who's spending loads of money on whisky? This is under £20 a bottle and worth every single penny. So there we have it, the Isle of Skye 8-year-old, and fantastic value. So what comes out of the basket next? My second whisky for my winter whisky collection is a Glenfarkles. Now I should say you've probably seen the first whisky first because that was in my Christmas collection last year, I think. Now you've seen Glenfarkles in my collections before, and in fact we had the 15-year-old in the winter whisky collection in 2016. But in 2017 I've gone younger, I've gone for the 10-year-old. And this is about youthful promise. So, just a little tiny dribble. You might think I'm not giving myself enough to actually taste. But you know, this evening we've got to go out and do a play reading, so I've got to keep sober. Although I am playing a slightly murderous chef. I am a cook, not a chef. So, Glenfarkles, what do we know about it? Family-owned, classic Speyside whisky, matured in sherry barrels. And the nose that you get from this, oh, it's all about the dried fruits from the sherry barrels, but I always find oranges in this whisky as well. Yes, it's youthful, and yes, there are expressions from this distillery which have much more depth and character. They've been around longer, they've seen a bit more of the world, but this, well, you can tell this is going to be a great whisky. Now, first of all, I need to say it is full of flavour. Why am I apologising for it only being 10 years old? Look, my Isle of Skye was 8 years old. It's because we usually associate Glenfarkles with older expressions. But that is so fruity. And yes, there's citrus, there's raisins, but gosh, it's absolutely mouth-watering. It is really characterful. And on that second sip, it all settles down. It's made its announcement that it's here, and it is just about comfort. So I don't know whether you've tried my citrus winter fruit salad. This would be absolutely perfect with it. Chicken dishes with a creamy sauce, absolutely wonderful. It's just a gorgeous whisky. I don't think I've ever tasted anything from Glenfarkles that hasn't really made my toes go in and out with pleasure. Next out of my bottle basket for my winter whisky collection is another whisky from Tullibardine. If you've seen my Whisky in the Vineyard collection, you will know that I was very, very enthusiastic about their 225 Sauterne finish. Now, this is, if you like, their entry level or their This Is Us whisky. They call it Sovereign, and it's matured in bourbon barrels. And Tullibardine is owned by a French wine company, so this sort of broad at the shoulder bottle, tapering into slim hips, is a bottle shape that's kind of unusual for whisky. But in the wine world, because so many women purchase the wine, this apparently is how we like our men, broad-shouldered, slim-hipped. And this is a bottle that is for us to pick off the shelf. Let me know what you think about that. So, a little tiny drop into here. Now, Tullibardine is a distillery that a lot of people don't know about, but it's one that I really do think should get more airtime, if you like, in our whisky world than it does. Yes, they're not really about age statements, they're really about how they finish their whiskies, and you would expect that, wouldn't you, from a distillery that is really all about, well, it's all about the craft of the action, but, you know, it's owned by a company who obviously know a terrific amount about different barrels because of their wine interests. That was a bit laboured, but it's not always easy to chat while you're trying to know something. So, very fresh nose, very different from the Glenfarkles. Obviously, the American oak delivering much more accessible sweetness, if you like, sugary sweetness. No, not sugary, but more rounded sweetness than the sort of the dried fruits nature of sherry barrels. Very beguiling. Gosh, it wants to be sipped, so why not? You know, sometimes when you taste a lot of whiskies, you just need to go back to American oak to kind of reroute your senses in whisky culture to a certain extent. And this is, first of all, my tongue is a little bit fizzy, which is always suggestive of top fruits of apples and green apples and things of that nature, which is perhaps a little surprising with this. There is a sweetness and there's this glorious dancing spice on the side of my tongue, which is about the seasoning, but it's also about the wood. Some people might call it a leatheriness, and it certainly dries to that, but it's not a deep leather, it's more of a suede, shall we say. Really nice, very refreshing. Refreshing might be a word that you would think of more perhaps with a summer whisky collection. But you know, we do need to be refreshed and got out of our sort of hibernation in the winter. And now when I taste the second sip, oh, it's so different. Yes, the sweetness dominates, but it's balancing with the spice. And it's not as cloying as bourbon can be. It's definitely got an edge on it, and this would be a great whisky to warm you up when you've been outside, perhaps chopping logs or pruning the apple trees. Now, this would be a good whisky for pruning apple trees. It's got all that fruity flavour in it, but it's warming and it's sweet and it's a welcome indoors. Welcome to my fire. Now, let me just check the ABV, which I should know if I was good at what I'm doing. Yes, you see, 43%, it's definitely a little stronger than what we've had to date. So I'm just going to put a drop of water in here. Lovely water jug given to me by one of my whisky women. Treasured. Much more open nose. And yes, I only had such a little bit in there. You could say I've drowned it, but it's made it much more balanced. It's taken away the nuance. Now 43%, that's not too strong to drink straight. And I would certainly say to you, if you don't know Tullibardine, this would be a great whisky there, sovereign, to start your acquaintance with this distillery. This is Killkarn, and it's their 12-year-old. It's the first age statement whisky from the newest distillery in Campbelltown on the Kintyre Peninsula. And it is this distillery that has caused Campbelltown to again be a proud Scotch whisky region in its own right. So in order to be that, they needed 5 working distilleries in Campbelltown, and this is the 5th. So all these whiskies have a real story for me, and you might have seen my videos about Glenfarkles. Now, this is the world's first community-owned distillery in Dingwall. And why would I bring this up when I'm talking to you about Killkarn? Well, Glenfarkles is rising from the ashes, if you like, of Ferintosh and Benwyvis in its 2 incarnations. And perhaps it's a shame, perhaps it's not, but the actual stills from the last Benwyvis distillery were bought and taken to Campbelltown, and they are now distilling this spirit. So there's a link for me and something very personal as I've bought into the Glenfarkles distillery. They weren't able to use the Benwyvis name because Diageo still owned that and wouldn't release it. So, less of the politics, back to the Killkarn. Now, what do we know about Campbelltown whiskies? They've got attitude. It's an exposed peninsula of land, dingle-dangling out into the elements on the west coast of Scotland. You could say lowland area really, but you know, it's sort of dingly-dangly down. And it's so different from anywhere else. So we expect attitude, we expect smokiness, and we expect a mouthful. And that's certainly what you get with this. There's smoke again in the nose, and instantly that is apparent in this whisky. After the first, the last 2, we had the seaweed nature in the Isle of Skye. But here it's much more, and it goes to the side of your tongue when you taste it for the first time. It's salty, it's refreshing because of that, and it makes your mouth water. So back to our Killkarn. Now, up until this 12-year-old, they've produced a number of whiskies called Work in Progress. And if you see one of those in a shop, buy it, because they're fascinating. Now, the 12-year-old has got a big nose. It's got all the hints of the Campbelltown whiskies that you would expect. It's got a bit of peatiness on it. It's rich, definitely rich. And a little bit of saltiness to it as well. Very exposed part of the coast. Now, that first sip is absolutely mouth-filling. It's much more challenging than any of the other whiskies we've had this evening, we've had today. Yes, it's got the maritime flavours, and they're big, you know, they're the sort that sit on your tongue. But the saltiness, to me, it makes me smack my lips, it makes me want my second sip. And there is so much going on there. There is top fruit to me, there is apples, but it's sort of baked apples on a bonfire. And then the second sip, much more challenging. Some zestiness comes through, almost limey, very refreshing, but full of flavour. And I know that for my whisky women, now this is 46% alcohol by volume, much, much bigger in every way. And for my whisky women, this was a Marmite whisky. Some people loved it, and it was way out in front of the others in popularity. And some people really couldn't get past the nose. So that will give you an indication. You know your whisky tastes. If you like maritime and you like a challenge, you're going to love this. And with just a drop of water, it calms it down. And what you have left is the sort of the meaty smokiness, almost like the outside of a kebab or something like that. Delicious. I love it. But I like a whisky that's challenging. Now, I'm going to let you into a secret. This fire is so efficient, I'm a little bit worried that these are going to explode. So I'm going to crack on very quickly and reveal my final whisky in my winter collection for 2017. And this is Douglaslang's Scallywag, their Speyside blend from their remarkable regional malts. Now, this again is a stronger whisky, it's 46%. I love the label. I've had the Epicurean in one of my collections before, and that was their Lowland blend. And I found that really quite challenging. Calling it the Epicurean, obviously they had decided that was their whisky to have with food, and it was brilliant with shellfish. But this Scallywag, well, it's just got so much going for it. A Scallywag of a friend of mine, a guy called Phil, bought me a bottle of this for my 60th birthday. Now, of course, I know I only look about 23. And he was a Scallywag because I'd asked for no presents, but golly was I pleased that he'd bought me this. Now, initially I was surprised at the nose, but if you know Ben Romack, which, you know, we kind of almost include in Speyside, you'll know that they do smoky whiskies. And this has got real character. If you think of Speyside as mainly smooth, this has been around a bit, and it's still elegant, but there's more than just smoothness in here. It's a very, very interesting nose. Now, 46%, and yet, I tell you, you don't really need to add a drop of water to this. It is so multi-layered. There's oranges, there's all those sort of citrus fruit flavours from this time of year, raisins, deep fruits, almost figginess to it. And it is a sort of a compilation of all the gorgeousness that comes out of Speyside distilleries. And it's what you would expect from a boutique blend. It really has taken the best of the region and created something gorgeous. And there's this honeyed sweetness, almost dried apricottiness in my mouth still as I go to take my second sip. Oh, it's still chewable, but it's revealing so much more. Sweetness, I guess, dominates, but it's seasoned with that tiny bit of smoke in the background. And it's such a comfort. You know, this is perfect winter whiskey. I'm going to try and put just the tiniest drop of water into this. I probably have added too much, although it is 46% proof, so it should, or alcohol by volume I should say, so it should be able to take it. Certainly opens up the nose. Yeah, delicious like that, but for me, I would choose to take it straight. So if you're interested in seasonal whiskies, as I am, to match my seasonal cooking, this will give you an amazing choice. Now, the Scallywag was way out in front with Whisky Women. This was the whisky that they absolutely loved. And then following up was the Glenfarkles and the Tullibardine. And then we had our gorgeous Killkarn 12-year-old and our Isle of Skye 8. But as I say, I think that one kind of was dwarfed by the others in the tasting. But I'm saying this was way out in front. What I'm telling you is there were 2 or 3 points between the favourite and the two here. It was so close, and it was the closest in voting as to which were the favourites and which would they buy in my whisky collections for perhaps the last 2 or 3 collections. So people loved all these whiskies. So in this rotten weather, sitting in front of a fire, if you want to have a dram and you want something a little bit different, please look for these. Thanks, and see you next time.